All right, so today I'm going to show you how to make a mug, which is not very different from the bowl at all. It's just a little bit of a different shape. I'm going to show you how to make a saucer on the wheel as well, making sure that your mug fits comfortably into your saucer. So we're learning a new tool today. And then I'm going to show you how to make a handle the same way that a professional ceramicist would make a handle. Okay, so there are a couple different ways to make handles, but the way that I'm going to show you today, I would say, is the way that if you watch an Instagram video of someone that's a ceramicist, or if you see a professional ceramicist making a handle, it's probably the way that they're going to make it. Okay, so that is what I'm going to show you today. So we've got two parts. I'm going to make the mug first. Okay, the mug, I would say it's easier to fit a saucer to a mug rather than a mug to a saucer. Did I say that right? You know what I mean. So I'm gonna make the mug first, and that's what I would recommend you do as well. So when we think about how much clay we need for our mug, it's gonna be the same amount as we needed for our bowl. So what did we think about when we were getting our clay ready for our bowl? What were some things that we had to think about? As far as what the clay needs to look like, what the clay needs to feel like. Gumdrop shape. Yep, I've got a gumdrop shape. What else?
Plastic.
Very nice and plastic. Yep, so we don't want it too hard. We don't want it too mushy, so nice and plastic. Okay, what else? How much? Your size handful, okay? And remember, we're not hiding it in our hands. It's a nice your size handful. As some of you probably noticed, you lose a lot of clay when you're trying to center and when it takes you a while. So starting with a little bit more is better. We can always cut clay off and get rid of clay, but we can't really add to once we're on the wheel. So definitely start with a really good your sized handful, okay? We're gonna make sure that it's really, really, really well wedged, and I think that's it. As far as the back goes, remember there is a right and a wrong way. We want to make sure that we have the textured side up. We don't want that sticker, so make sure you've got textured side up, and make sure that it's not warped, so it should sit on there nice and flat. If it's wobbling a lot, first check and see if there's any clay on the bottom, and then if it's just warped, then I would just go grab another one, okay? The other thing that we want to make sure of, the bottom of our clay, you want to make sure that it doesn't have any divots. I feel like there was at least one person in each class that when their bowl dried off, there was almost like this weird little swirly hole in the bottom. And that's because when you went to throw it onto your bat, it wasn't completely flat. It had like a little air pocket, and that's what causes that. So you really want to make sure that when you throw your clay onto the bat, you have a nice flat bottom, okay? So I'm gonna throw that on there. When I'm going to start, what do I have to do first, no matter what we're making on the wheel?
Wet your hands.
I do have to wet my hands. What's the first step?
Center it.
Center it. Yes, I do have to turn it on. And what speed am I going to go for centering? Full speed. Yep. So we're going to go full speed. So I've thrown it on there as close to center as possible. I made it look as nice as I could. Remember, wet your hands. Notice how much I wet my hands. And the first step of centering is coning up. Yep. So remember, we're going to lock in. So elbows into your hip bones, flex your biceps. We want our hands to be straight up and down. Don't let them angle. If they're angling, so are your elbows, they're coming out. Your elbows should always be attached to your body, okay? We want to make sure that we've got our mitten hands, not gloves, so that we don't catch our clay. And we want to make sure that the side of our hand is touching the bat. So you can see the water from the side of my hand is making a circle. Anytime that your hand is close to the bat, attach it to the bat. Otherwise, you've got a little bit of clay that slides out, and that makes it nearly impossible to center, okay? So I'm anchoring in, I'm flexing my biceps, hands straight up and down. I'm gonna squeeze in and let it pop, and then I'm going to follow it up at the last minute. So pop, follow. Okay, then I'm gonna cone down. So to cone down, I'm using the heel of my right hand. I'm not just flattening it, I'm kind of on the side. Fold your mitten hand over, left mitten hand on the side. So, and that left hand needs to stay straight the whole time, okay? Don't let it angle, because then your elbow's coming out. And we are going to squeeze equal pressure in and down, and it's really important that as you're coning down, you stay really nice and steady, okay? Because this is what actually starts to center it. So I'm locked in, flexing my biceps, I'm pushing down and in. As I get to the bottom, it gets wobbly, and I'm trying to make sure that I don't let my hands wobble. As soon as my hand could reach the bat, I attached it to the bat, okay? So overall looks a little bit better. Can we tell that it's still not there yet? Okay, so if you put your hand on either side or if you put your finger on it, if you can feel like it's unevenly wobbling, we're not quite centered yet. So remember, we want to cone up and down at least twice. So again, I'm locking in, hands straight up and down. My hands are wet. I'm going to squeeze, let it pop, and then follow it up. Another thing to remember, your center point should always be the tallest point when you're centering. Don't let that center point dip down. Okay, now to cone down, locking in, left hand straight on the side, right hand kind of top, side, fold that over, equal pressure in and down. As I start to feel it wobble, really flex your biceps and really try to counteract that. As soon as that left hand can reach the bat, seal it to the bat, and then that hand goes to the side to get back to that gumdrop shape. So when we're coning down, we're always just going back to that gumdrop, and we're trying to make it look like an even nicer gumdrop, okay? So it's still a tiny bit wobbly, not much, but definitely at the bottom, I can feel it kind of doing this. So I've coned up and down twice, which aligns the clay particles. So now I'm going to change my method a little bit. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing that I did last time after I had coned up and down. I'm going to make a V. You can also make an A, so it all just depends on if you would rather pull towards you or push away from you. I prefer to push away from me. So I'm going to make a V. I'm going to push away from me. I'm going to squeeze in with my hands attached to the bat and straight up and down. And then I'm going to push down. So, and I'm just using the crook of my thumbs. I'm not making a hole. They are kind of up in the air on the side, and I'm essentially just making sure that it doesn't cone up. I'm making sure that I keep that shape. So I'm essentially trapping it and trying to move the whole thing into the center, okay? So I'm gonna lock in, hands straight up and down, mitten hands attached to the bat. I'm gonna push, squeeze, and push down until I feel like it stops wobbling in my hand. So it does not look like I'm doing anything at all, but I'm actually giving quite a bit of pressure between my hands. And when I feel like it stops wobbling, I'm gonna release pressure, okay? So that step is kind of funny. Watching me, it looks like I'm doing nothing. It's totally a feeling thing. And you're literally, and you might even try closing your eyes when you're doing this, okay? So lock in, squeeze, push, push, okay? And you notice I kind of crossed my thumbs, but I'm not putting the tip of my thumb down because I don't want to make a hole. And I'm literally just compressing and feeling for it to stop wobbling. So that's totally just a step of feeling. And that's usually when you can feel it, that's when the light bulb goes off and you figure out centering. But it's nothing that I can tell you. You just literally have to keep doing it until you feel it, okay? Just keep doing the right steps until you feel like it stops wobbling. Okay, first step of a vessel. So our bowl was a vessel, so is our mug. What's our first step for a vessel now that we're centered? I need to open a hole, yep. So remember, in wheel throwing, all the time, no matter what you're making, we either have one hand working, one hand supporting, or we have two hands working together to complete a job, and if they're working together, they're touching. So in the step to make the hole, our hands are working together to complete a job. So our thumbs are gonna pretend like they got glued together with super glue and we cannot get them apart. We're gonna support with our fingers and we're gonna still stay locked in. So my elbows are still attached to my body, okay? It's really important that we lock in. If we just try to make a hole like this, you can see that the clay is kind of pushing my thumbs around. We need it to stay in the center. So I'm supporting with my fingers, I'm supporting with my arms, I'm hovering over the center with my thumbs, and I'm gonna start to push down making sure that they do not come apart. If I need to re-wet in the process, that's fine, but they are not coming apart, okay? So this is what they looked like while they were down in that hole. They are stuck together, okay? So making the hole, I'm literally just trying to make a hole. I'm not trying to widen it at all yet, okay? Once I make a pretty significant valley, then I need to open it a little bit, okay? So now at this step, I have one working hand, one supporting hand, so I'm gonna support with my left, and then with my right, 2 middle fingers, and notice I'm still locked in, I'm gonna pull that wall straight towards me. I only wanna open the hole enough that I can get in there to measure my base, okay? So, support, and I'm gonna pull straight towards me, and then I'm gonna get in there with my sponge, and I'm gonna flatten my base so that I have a nice accurate measurement. Okay, then I'm gonna stop my wheel. I'm gonna take my needle tool to measure my base, so I'm gonna push it all the way down in there, and then make sure that you put your finger where the clay stops on the needle tool. What measurement are we going for? 1/4 of an inch, and we're actually there. Couple other reminders, don't touch your clay when it's not moving. Okay, I had to minimally touch it to measure, but I'm not like sitting here trying to rework it. Don't touch your clay while it's not moving. You will throw it off center. If your base was still too thick, and notice when I restart, I'm not going full speed anymore. So this is when I start slowing down, okay? If you wanna slow down immediately after you center to make your hole and open it up, you certainly can. But we're gonna go more of like a medium fast speed right here, okay? If you did need to open your base or make your base thickness a little bit smaller, remember you're just gonna push down right in the middle with your middle finger and pull that clay out to incorporate it into the outside wall, okay? Now since we're making a mug, we don't really want it to be very wide at the base. So the next thing that we're concerned about is our base thickness, our foot thickness. Not anything else, just literally the width of what's attached to the bat right now, okay? Since I'm making a mug, I don't want it to be really wide at the bottom. I want it to be fairly narrow. So I am not gonna open it up anymore. If you did want it to be wider at the bottom, just remember you would keep support with your left and you would keep pulling straight out with your right until you get only that base thickness where you want it. So remember, we're not concerned about the form of the mug yet, okay? So now that we have our base thickness correct, now we wanna make sure that right where our walls meet our base, we've got that more of a right angle. So if you have a valley, we wanna make it more of a cylinder on the inside. So if you need to, right where your walls meet your base down here, you might need to push into it to make sure that you don't have a ton of thickness down here. It's definitely gonna be the thickest down here, but it shouldn't be like a valley anymore, okay? So now we're ready to pull up our walls and we wanna go about medium speed. Okay, I'm gonna say that's pretty good. And remember, you wanna be pulling your walls on the side that's going away from you. You should never be pulling your walls on the side that's coming towards you. It's gonna make you nick it and it just causes problems. Remember in this step, we have 2 hands working together, therefore they should be touching, okay? So you don't wanna pull your walls like this. First of all, you've got a hand working on the side that's coming towards you, and you've got 2 hands working that are not touching, and my elbows are not attached to me, okay? So, left hand, I'm gonna fold it over the side of my project. Right hand is gonna kind of come in and touch my hand. I'm using my fingertips. Some of you are kind of doing this, which you kind of can do, but it's harder to kind of pinpoint where your pressure is. So if you can, kind of try to just think you're using your fingertips, and then I kind of fold my elbows in and get a little bit more comfortable. More pressure on your outside hand. Remember, we're making a cylinder. We don't want it to get too wide. So I'm gonna give a little bit more pressure on my outside hand, and I'm gonna squeeze up and in, equal pressure, staying in one line. I'm gonna pull to the top, not past the top, and then I'm gonna release pressure, okay? You will not get it to 1/4 of an inch all the way, all in one pull, okay? I would say 3 pulls, 2 or 3 pulls is typically about what you need to get it to the correct thickness, okay? So then I'm gonna come back, I'm gonna use the sponge this time. Hand shape changes a little bit just because it's gotten taller. So this time, this thumb can't get all the way to the bottom, so it's just kind of hanging out, and that's where I kind of lock in my other hand. Elbows are anchored again, and I'm gonna squeeze, go up and in. A little bit more pressure on that outside hand so that it doesn't get too wide. Pull to the top, not past the top. Okay, and I think I need one more. So my clay is pretty good from about here up. We've got that 1/4 inch. It's a little bit thick still way down at the bottom where it tends to stay thick. So I'm gonna give a really good squeeze down there at the bottom. Notice my hand shape changed again, but my hands are still touching. So I've got my thumb resting on this hand and I'm still anchored in. So I'm gonna squeeze a little bit more at the bottom, and then I'm only gonna squeeze until it incorporates in, and then I'm letting up pressure, okay? So this does not quite look like a mug yet, but now my wall thickness is correct. I'm right around 1/4 inch. I tend to go a little bit thinner, especially at the top, because I think that makes drinkability a little bit better. So now we need to shape it, okay? And we can slow down even a tiny bit more. Just remember, we never want to go snail speed, okay? So to shape it, and you just kind of have to decide what you want it to look like. Mugs look all different, so I would grab your sketches for sure, kind of see what you are going for. And if you want it to get wider, okay, I'm gonna start at the bottom, and I'm just gonna kind of push on that inside wall where I want it to get wider. So this hand's not doing anything, it's just supporting. Okay, so you kind of just have to decide what you want it to look like. I will tell you, remember that your clay is gonna shrink. So if it looks huge, let it be a little bit huge, okay? Because it's gonna shrink, and you don't wanna have like a teeny tiny little mug by the end of it. So me personally, I would rather it be big and then just be like a larger mug, rather than you keep trim cutting and you keep making it smaller and then it dries and shrinks and you're like, oh, I can't do anything with this. So just kind of keep that in mind, that your clay is gonna shrink, okay? So you just kind of have to think about what you want it to look like. Couple things that I will tell you, as far as the top lip goes, it can angle a little bit, but think about drinking out of it. And you want it to be somewhat straight up and down, okay? Think about if I made a mug like this. Imagine drinking out of that. You've like created this water slide that here it comes, and then it's gonna come like barreling over that lip, and it's gonna be really difficult to drink out of. So be careful with your angles at the top. And then on the opposite of that, if we made it go too far in, think about what that would be like to drink out of. The water would kind of gather in this little bubble, and then it would probably spill all over the place. So although you can have a slight angle at the top, I would recommend making it, for the most part, kind of straight up and down, okay? So just think about what you want it to look like. And then once you get it there, if you would like to trim cut a little bit, you can. This is probably gonna be a fairly large mug. I tend to like large mugs, but I do wanna show a trim cut again. Remember, you only need a trim cut if your project is either too tall for your liking, or if your top lip is kind of wonky. So I'm gonna show you one. I don't technically need one, but I just wanna show you again so that you can see it again. So needle tool I'm gonna hold in my right hand, and I've got my cutting point totally exposed. I'm gonna tuck in. I'm gonna go at a 45-degree angle on the side that's going away from me. Pointer finger of my left hand is gonna come on the inside where I want it to be cut. Thumb is gonna just hook onto my hand just for stability. That elbow is tucked in too. Once you know where you wanna cut it, let it touch. Don't move it, let it glide in, so we're not being stabby. We're just letting it glide. Once it hits that inside finger, you should be able to lift it up, okay? If you're too scared to lift it up, you can take the needle tool out and stop your wheel and then just pick that up, okay? And then I'm just gonna leave my scraps over there. And then you do want to make sure that you smooth that out. So no matter what, at this stage, we should never be going full speed. If I all of a sudden start going full speed, my mug could totally just be obliterated because the walls are thinner now and it almost just can't handle full speed at this point. Okay, so I'm gonna get it into the shape that I want it. I'm gonna make sure that I clear out any excess slip, sludge, liquid, water. We don't want sitting water. Okay, and then what's my last step? What do I still need to do? I need to cut the foot, yep. So I'm gonna grab my rib, hold it horizontally. We're using the corner of it, touch it to the bat, and then we're essentially just cutting off that flare so that when it dries off the bat, we have a nice clean bottom edge, okay? So I'm gonna cut in, and then I can take my sponge just to make sure that that's nice and smooth, okay? So I've got a mug, kind of. I don't really have a mug, I have a cup right now. Do you know the difference between a cup and a mug?
There's a handle.
Mugs have handles, yep, so I have a cup right now. Can I let this dry out? No, why not? I have to slip and score my handle on. So if this is all the further that you get, do not let it dry out. And the other thing that I need to do still is measure for my saucer. So in comes our new tool. So they are in that container at the end of the wheel wall. These are called calipers. C-A-L-I-P-E-R-S, calipers, okay? There are two different kinds. They both work just the same, so it literally doesn't matter which one you use. And because my mug is stuck to my bat right now, can I very easily check to see if it is gonna fit into my saucer? No. So then you might say, well, just let it dry off and then see if it fits. What's the problem there? If it doesn't fit, we can't fix it. But then what's the other problem? If I let this dry and then I'm making a wet clay saucer, what happens when clay dries?
It shrinks.
It shrinks. When clay dries, it shrinks. So if I'm like, well, I'm just gonna attach my handle, let this dry, and then make my saucer, this is already shrunken, and then my saucer is still gonna shrink, right? So I need a wet measurement of my mug to make sure that it's gonna fit in my saucer, okay? I do still need to add a handle. So if I take these calipers, and these are measuring devices, most often used to make lids on wheel thrown things, and if you move on to ceramics 2, I teach you how to make a lid with these, a little lidded container. But for our purposes, we are using it to make sure that our mug is gonna fit in our saucer. So think about, you want a little bit of wiggle room. You don't want your mug to fit into your saucer like a puzzle piece. We want a little bit of wiggle room. So when I measure this, I'm gonna give a little bit of wiggle room. The other thing that you have to think about, depending on how you attach your handle, if your handle swoops out to where it could hit the wall of your saucer, you need to think about that too, okay? So you might give it a little extra wiggle room. Just kind of think about what it needs. So I'm going to give a little bit of wiggle room, and it literally doesn't matter which one you use. So if I were using these ones, I would give it a little bit of wiggle room, okay? And then with the red ones, this measurement and this measurement, although it might look like an optical illusion, they're the same measurement, okay? So you'll notice I'm gonna use this side to measure my mug, but then when I go to test it into my saucer, I'm actually gonna use this side. So kind of just keep an eye on that. So I'm gonna set this aside for now. And then I'm going to measure for my saucer. Okay, so about the same amount of clay, but we probably won't need quite as much. I'm gonna do all these beginning steps pretty quickly, okay? So we're gonna center. Okay, now if we think of a saucer, which is essentially like a little plate, it's not very tall, right? So once I get it centered, I'm actually going to keep pushing down. So I'm pushing down like with right here, okay? And I'm gonna actually flatten my centered piece of clay a little bit to already give me almost a plate shape, okay? Then what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go ahead and slow down a little bit. I am gonna go ahead and make a hole, but just remember we don't have as much depth, so you don't wanna go too far. So I'm gonna make my hole, and then I'm gonna start opening it. I'm gonna slow down a little bit more. So I'm gonna start opening it. I'm gonna flatten my base, and then I'm gonna check my base thickness. Oops. Okay, we're right at 1/4 of an inch, so we're good to go. Now, whereas before with our bowl, with our mug, we maybe didn't widen it much more, okay? This measurement needs to fit down into my saucer. So we need to actually make this quite a bit wider, okay? So what I'm gonna do, and we have to be very careful with this because we have to make sure that the foot or base comes with us, because if we only pull the walls out and our base stays narrow, but then our walls get really wide, they're gonna flop. But we also don't wanna dig down into our base, because if we dig down into our base, we're not gonna have a base anymore and the walls are gonna fall off, okay? So there's like a sweet spot, and it's right where the walls meet the base, and you think about it as you're pushing this wall down into the back, okay? So we're gonna keep opening. I like to use my sponge so I don't make finger marks. So I'm gonna support, and then I'm gonna start opening it up. Don't go too fast, and just keep an eye on your base. If you notice that the base is getting thicker, you're probably not pulling low enough or pulling it out low enough. If you're noticing that your base is making like a ramp down, you're probably digging into your base and you need to lift your fingers up a little bit. Okay, so I'm gonna start pulling this out, and you'll notice your walls are getting much shorter, but that's okay because we don't need much wall, okay? So right now it fits in there, but it's almost coming up on this side wall, so I'm gonna open it a little bit more. We want it to comfortably fit in there. Okay, so now it comfortably fits in there. I'm also gonna double check my mug measurement, okay? Because I don't wanna, it's better to measure twice, right? And then once I get that, I'm gonna check my base, and I'm just gonna take my sponge and just kind of go back and forth and compress it and make sure it's all even. And then pulling the walls is gonna be just like a pinch because they're not very tall. I'm gonna pull them straight up and down, and then I'm obviously gonna need a trim cut. That's way too tall for a saucer. So I'm gonna do a trim cut. You have to have some walls. You can't just turn in a flat disc. I'm gonna smooth those out. So you're gonna pull up straight, and then if you wanna angle them out, I'm just kind of pushing on it. You just wanna be careful that you don't collapse it, okay? And then I'm gonna cut my foot. And I think it looks kind of funny at the bottom. If you want to cut that foot kind of way in and almost like shave some of that off, just to make it more plate-like, you certainly can. And then I'm going to do one more little trim cut. Smooth it out. Okay, so now we're good here. Can I let my saucer dry out? Yes. Okay, and I'm actually gonna check my measurement one more time. Fits down in there, so we should be good. Yes, your saucer can dry out, okay? Now at this point I need to make my handle. I'm gonna turn my wheel off. You actually are not making your handle on the wheel. I just am sitting here, so I'm gonna use the wheel. So this is how all professional ceramicists are gonna make a handle. And it's called pulling a handle or milking a handle. Has anyone ever milked a cow? No. There's usually one. Yeah, milk cow. Okay, so it's like the same motion as milking a cow. So when we start, you want to make sure that your clay is really, really, really well wedged. Otherwise, it's going to fall apart. I'm turning off my wheel and I'm going to move my water bucket to my wheel head. So definitely make sure your wheel is turned off, okay? And I'm going to kind of push it into like a spike, like we're hunting vampires or something. That's a weird stuff when pulling a handle, okay? And so it's called pulling a handle or milking a handle. This makes the very best handle, and this is how all professional ceramicists, okay, I shouldn't say all, most professional ceramicists make a handle, okay? So if you want to be professionals, this is how we're going to make our handle, okay? So I am going to kind of get it down into as close to shape as I want. I'm letting the water do the work. I've made kind of like a ridge for my hand so that I don't drop it. You don't want it to be too soft or it'll fall apart. I'm going to dip and I'm going to let the water do the work. I'm going to pull all the way down and turn, okay? I'm not squeezing in very much. I'm literally letting the water do the work, okay? And I'm going to keep rotating it. And then once I start to get close to 1/4 of an inch, and you might even go closer to 1/2 an inch, instead of rotating it, I'm going to pull down just on 2 sides because handles tend to be kind of flat, okay? So now that's way more than I actually need. So now I'm going to cut off the end because it tends to be kind of weird at the end. I will say if you pull and it pulls off, you still have a lot to work with. So just if you're consistently pulling it off or it's getting uneven, just let the water do the work. I really didn't squeeze in very much, okay? So I'm going to cut the end off. Make sure that I have enough length for a handle. I'm going to cut off there. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab my mug. Okay, and you want to be careful. And you want to kind of put it into the shape of a handle. I think that's a little bit too big. So I'm going to cut a little bit more off. And when I cut a little bit more off, I'm actually going to cut it at an angle. Okay, I'll show you this in a second. Okay, so I'm going to cut it at an angle. Okay, so you see I cut those angles so that when it attaches to my mug, it has more of a connection point. Now, do you think it would be smart to attach right now? Look at it, it's so flimsy, it's wet, it's falling apart. It's not really falling apart, it's just not staying where I want it to stay. So I'm gonna really carefully, on my bat, put it in the shape that I want it to be in, and I'm gonna let it sit there. Do not let it dry out though, okay? If it's the end of the period, you wanna make sure you cover this up. I would put the handle towards the back of the bag because it's gonna wanna dry out pretty quickly. If you feel like you're at the point where you could attach, or you wanna just go ahead and attach, you could heat gun your handle. It dries pretty quickly, and then attach it on there. So once it's ready, you'll slip and score it on. So score both, slip one, and you also wanna kind of make sure, if we look at this one, that it's straight. So look at it kind of straight on and make sure that it looks good from all angles, okay? Once it's slipped and scored on, then we can let everything dry out, right? My last warning, do not ever pick up a mug by the handle until it's bisque fired. It will break, okay? Questions? All right, will you go ahead and stop that?